Welcome to another Good Dads podcast. I am Jay Fotsch alongside my co-host Diana from Good Dads, and we also have Chief Paul Williams here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
We really appreciate it. I had to wear my Cardinal stuff for opening day.
Of course, absolutely.
I apologize for dressing down, but I am a fan also, so it's part of it.
It's perfect.
Yeah. So, Chief, we're going to ask you a little bit about, obviously since we're good dads, just about your experience being a dad and some of your family.
Well, I consider myself one of those.
Yeah.
I'm a good dad. I've got 3 kids, all older than maybe most of the folks you're dealing with on a regular basis. So I have a 30. I gotta guess. Remember ages now because one of them just had a birthday. 31, 27, 22.
Okay.
So one married, and I have a granddaughter, and lives out of state. And then the 27 to 22-year-olds live here locally, both working and college graduates. And I hope someday my wife does. They're going to raise their own family, so we'll have more grandkids running around.
Yeah. Now, was that hard? You think that was hard for them with their dad being a police officer?
Absolutely.
Getting in trouble?
Absolutely.
Like, it was, I would be like, Dad, listen to what I did. All right. I want you to understand.
It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault.
One of your coworkers.
I jumped on that pretty quick. I should have let you finish your question, but I think hard in 2 ways. When they were younger, probably not as much, because but as the chief of police, absolutely affected their upbringing and their interaction with some friends, and in a positive or negative way, depending on what was going on. But I think they certainly learned how to handle that appropriately and respond appropriately, and never acquiesce to the request that, hey, if this happens, can your dad get us out of trouble, by saying absolutely not?
Oh, no.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Diana, would you have done that?
Absolutely not.
If your dad was a police officer, like, hey, we got caught, but I'm wondering if you can call in a couple favors.
Yeah.
And you would be like, no, you're going to have to learn the hard way.
I'd be more scared, I think.
Yeah.
I'd be more afraid. Yeah.
Well, as a son of a police officer, my dad and my grandpa are both policemen.
Oh, wow.
So that kind of set the tone for me. My first speeding ticket, he actually called my dad and said, I want to make sure you know what your son just did.
Oh, wow.
And when I got home, my dad met me at the door and took the keys and said, you're going to pay this ticket and you're not going to drive. He said for a month. Lasted 2 weeks because he didn't want to be driving me around very much. So, but learn my lesson there. You're not going to hide anything because they're always going to find out. So be honest.
That's
before
good learning your lesson after one time. My 20s probably really... it's kind of cost me some future jobs.
Uh-oh.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I had to be told a lot of times. I had to learn by mistakes, I think.
Yeah.
So that police
every
background
mistake
check isn't something you want to undergo?
No, I would rather you not while you're here if you could. I try not to
Maybe
call
later.
that.
Maybe later.
So we're going to talk to you a little bit about today, the difference a dad makes. And before we get into that, you brought some giveaways. Right, from the police station?
Absolutely not.
We're giving away some ammo.
I wasn't asked.
Some handcuffs.
Man, I knew, so I was prepared for this. Absolutely not. Folks watching at home, don't listen to a word he says about anything.
They know that already.
Okay? I can give away stickers and coloring books and little mini badges, but nothing else outside of that.
Nothing that's been confiscated.
No confiscation.
Those little cage.
No get out of jail free cards. We talked about that before we came on. Those do not exist. Okay. For my kids or anyone else.
I think I'm beyond that, but I may have had to call in a favor a couple decades ago.
Noted. So, Chief Williams, the purpose of the Difference a Dad Makes podcast is to talk about some of the science behind truly the difference a dad makes, but instead of putting it within the context of science and academia, we're trying to bring it into real life.
Absolutely.
So we thought you would be perfect for the show for that reason. Since you've been policing for 45 years, I want to zoom out and ask you about fatherhood as a whole. What have you seen? What is the difference a dad makes for what it is that you do with safety? And
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I will echo what the academics and what the research says. But I can talk about personal experience, anecdotal life experiences in 45 years of policing as an officer up through the chief. The number one thing that makes a difference in a kid's life is a dad. Having that dad present, engaged, involved, around. And it's not just early on. I mean, it's through life. And I've seen that, more examples that I can count about kids who didn't have that and the decisions they made and where they went and who to turn to. Mentorship groups where there's not a dad involved, like big brothers, big sisters, and opportunities like that absolutely make a difference as well, for those that don't. But absent that, having that true father figure, always preferable to have it to be your dad. Okay. Whether that's a birth dad, stepdad, a granddad, uncle, somebody that steps in and fills that role, absolutely is, in my personal opinion, like I said, it backed up by scientific data, I'm sure, but that is the number one factor in making sure that kids make good choices and turn out the way you want them to turn out.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up. I'm curious what you think about dad's role beyond just being the disciplinarian, right? I think a lot of times we think of dad as being like, wait till your father gets home, that sort of attitude, or being afraid as a preventative for maybe getting in trouble or ending up with having to deal with the consequences of that. But it sounds like from what you're saying, dad's impact is so much more beyond just being disciplined.
And so I think by nature that becomes the preferred role. I don't think it needs to be the case. And I've been around families where the opposite is true. It's fun dad, mom's a disciplinarian. I think a good balance is what you need. What you just said, absolutely the worst thing you do. Wait till your father gets home.
Yeah, that's scary.
If something needs to happen, then mom needs to step in and take care of it. All right. If there needs to be additional or certainly communication between parents, whether they're in a nuclear family together or whether they're in a split family, absolutely needs to take place and make sure they're on the same page. But being a good dad is not just being the bad guy. Talk to any of my kids, and they'll say their best memories of dad being the fun dad. Being engaged in their activities. I coached all three of my kids in sports, a variety of sports, whether I knew anything about it or not. I played baseball, football, basketball growing up. I never even seen a soccer ball until my kids started playing, but I became a soccer coach to be engaged and involved and help them along the way and be involved in some of those kids' lives who were there who didn't have that. So, taking vacations and taking them out for ice cream and just sitting down and talking,
or
listening. Having a conversation about what's going on in their lives, is so much more important. Now, do kids want rules? Do they want guidelines? Do they want structure? Do they want some discipline? They don't admit it, but absolutely they want it. They need it. They want that framework where they feel comfortable and safe, and knowing that if they get outside of bounds, man, there's going to be some repercussions to that, but not being the hammer all the time. That's not a good dad. That's just the punisher. That's a disciplinarian. That's not what that's about. So you got to have that balance. And I realize in some families, that may absolutely be the role. I can tell you, I experienced, my mom did that, more than once. But usually that was because I was old enough and that it didn't matter what she said anymore, and she needed dad to back her up. It didn't start that way.
Yeah. And mom and dad being a united.
Yeah, being united, and mom just not. You can't just always be I'm going to let it go till dad gets home kind of thing, because then that does put the dad in that negative context, and it's kind of hard to get out of that when you want to enjoy things and have fun. So I think there needs to be a balance, and absolutely there's a role for that. I'm not saying that you just need to be the fun dad all the time and just let them get away with everything, because although kids may say they want that, they don't want that. They want those.
They probably don't need that. Also.
Yeah, they don't. It's not. That's not being a good dad. One way or the other. So it's a balance. It really is.
Yeah. This Good Dads podcast is brought to you in part by our generous supporters. This week, we'd like to thank the following: Prime Inc., Mr. and Mrs. Bob and Susan Biney, Midwest Auto Source, Midmo Bank, Drive Leadership Group. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Visit our website at gooddads.com to learn how to contribute to the Good Dads mission. And to your point about the actual anecdote, and I know we talk about this a lot when with Dr. Baker, of over 85% of incarcerated men did not have a male father figure in their lives.
Right.
And I'm sure you experienced that a lot in the last 45 years of what you do. But that still blows my mind every time that we mention it on these podcasts.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So let me back. I mean, so think about that. You said incarcerated men. I mean, so there's that double whammy of, if there's not a father, a dad involved in a child's life, if it's a boy, it's even worse.
Yeah.
You know, girls, and man, I've got 2 daughters, and man, they were daddy's girls growing up, you know, still love them to death. But as they gravitate towards mom and being like mom and wanting to be like mom, and it's not as impactful, because from my experience, mom's always there, you know, but not having, there's so many single moms out there, all right, that we're seeing that continual generational impact of, okay, I didn't have a father figure, so then I'm not a father figure, so then my kids face the same thing.
Exactly.
Repeat cycle.
Sure.
And then you mentioned the incarcerated men. If you look back at their history, it's generational. I mean, it's one after the other. I can give you examples of, you know, crime families, you know, where it's like the dad, the son, the uncle, the grandfather, they've all been in that cycle of crime and violence because they didn't have anybody to step in, a male figure, a good dad to step in at some point and say, that's not right. I'm not letting you get away with that. Trust me, there are some very strong women out there in the world that correct behavior and have that impact, but there is nothing like having a dad stand up and tell you that when you're a young boy.
And I think it's probably true on the flip side of that too. We were talking about generational cycles, and if you didn't grow up with a good dad, all of the challenges that come with that whenever you become a dad.
Right.
But the cycle can stop with you, right?
Absolutely.
Like if you say, I'm going to make the choice to be a good dad, and I'm going to maybe rely on resources like good dads to make that happen, your upbringing does not need to define who you are.
And that's what I love about this group and Dr. Baker when she first put this together and we first talked about it, was that point right there. It's a way to reach out to men who maybe didn't have that and not wanting to repeat that, but not knowing how because they didn't have that. So, the cycle stopping with you, and then building that different generational impact moving forward, where then, you know, if you learn to be a good dad and you're a good dad to your son, then they are more likely to be a good dad moving forward. Absolutely is important for all of us.
Yeah, and I think that basic first step is what we kind of repeat. Like they're like, well, how do I do that? What do I do with good dads? What do I do? And the easy first step is just talking to other dads.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't know what to do, that's exactly what this is. This is a resource for community dads that are in, you know, situations where you know, they also have kids and they want to talk to other dads on how they can become better. And I think when we get involved in a group and we're like-minded people, that tends to relate a little bit more and it hits home a lot.
Absolutely. And I mean, maybe that's someone who doesn't have any father figure, any example of a good dad in their life. You know, I was blessed. I had a dad and a grandfather and uncles, and I have good friends. They had good friends, but I have a network of good dads that I can reach out to already, either peers or older. So plugging someone into that network when they haven't had that is absolutely vital to make them successful in being a good dad.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of my dad friends right now who have a little bit older of kids, like in teenager or 10, because, you know, I have a 6-year-old stepdaughter at home, and then we have a 1-month-old. So I'm talking to them about like, what about when your kids were 6? Or hey, did you have this experience with your, you know, 3-week-old? Like, absolutely. What's going on? And it's so nice to reach out to other dads and just be like, oh, yeah, man, that's normal.
Yeah.
Like, you will get, like, it'll get better. Like, there'll be a different season of life. Like, you won't walk around like a zombie forever.
Absolutely.
And then some of the dads you talk to, they're like, you know, I've kind of forgotten about that.
Yeah.
You know, my
because it goes away.
12, and that was 12 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't even remember what you're saying, but now I do. Like,
But Jay, that's huge, because it can be so simple. It really does just feel like chewing the fat. Like I'm just hanging out with my friends. But what you're doing is creating and maintaining this valuable resource, this network of other dads. Imagine the difference that makes.
Because think about what we do in life. There's instructions and guidance and teaching for everything else, except being a parent.
Yeah.
You know, there is literally, I mean, I'm not saying there's not books, but you're not given an instructional booklet at the hospital when you're handed your son or daughter. Yeah. It's, well, you should know. Yeah. Right. You made them. Now you grow them. All right. And for most of us, there is that network of family members and peer and that support group that we plug into. But we already talked, if you haven't had that, you need to find a way to plug into that, and having that community of good dads to go to is really great.
And that's what I love about these podcasts. It's not necessarily a podcast about we're giving you advice. A lot of times it's just like we're sharing our mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or we're like trying to work through it together, or like just our experiences. So maybe we prevent someone else from doing it, or like be like, hey, you're not alone.
You're not alone. Absolutely.
This is almost kind of like, you're talking to a group of dads, but we try to do it that way to where this isn't like some kind of educational spreadsheet of like, we're telling you what to do, or like we've got it figured out. It's just the opposite.
Right.
You wouldn't get anybody to tune in if it was that way. Trust me. The quiz and the test at the end, and no, don't do it that way.
However, we will get more listeners if we give away free ammo.
Oh no, not this again.
Not sure if
not
that's
from you.
quite
not from
the
you.
right
Maybe we
listener
get
you're looking for.
maybe we get Winchester to could they maybe
in a proper environment?
Let's talk about it after the fact.
Okay, awesome.
Responsible gun ownership has to be a component of that, not just giving away.
Well, that leads into our next question: safety.
All right.
Safety is a big thing about what a difference a dad makes, and what you're a perfect person to talk about safety with kids.
There are so many different avenues that can take. There's personal safety and providing a safe space in a safe environment, and monitoring your kids' activities and making sure that where they're at and what they're doing. And then there's that additional component that I didn't really have to deal with a lot when my kids were growing up, but cyber safe, there's so much out there in social media. I mean, I'll date myself. My eldest daughter, when she got her first MySpace page when she was like 14, and I called her and made her shut it down because I said, there's no way you're putting anything out there about
Wow.
Yeah, that's how long ago that was. And now
I thought you were going to say AOL. Or like, you've got mail. Well, so that's not too bad.
My AOL email address was, but
there we go.
So I've experienced all that. But now it's you can't lock them down. You have to provide guidance and protection. But what I tell parents, it's just like in a physical safe environment, your kids are your responsibility, and they need to realize that. And so, yes, you should be involved and engaged and knowledgeable and have the ability to look at what they're looking at, see what they're doing. It always floors me when you get a 12-year-old that says, you can't come in my room or look at my phone. Oh, well, no, absolutely. The door will come off that room if all right. And if you don't give me access to everything, you're not going to have it. So things like, a kind of a plug for an app. Life 360 is an app that all my kids have had on their phones since I got them. I know where they're at. It's not a spying. It's a comfort level for my wife and I, and also comfort for them. All right, that hey, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, and Dad's going to find out, don't do it. Yeah. Okay, but car breaks down, run out of gas, my phone's not working. I mean, then here's the last place you were. So. I'll go back to what I said earlier. It's sitting down with your kids and having a conversation and explaining why. Yeah. And then your goal is to keep them safe and share life experiences that you don't want them to be exposed to.
Or prepare them for when they do have to come across those situations later.
Yeah. If someone approaches them, it's a very, very basic level of stranger danger awareness, instruction, but on social media, what to do, where to go, where not to go, and making sure that mom and dad are aware. And if you're concerned, then kids should actually be comfortable, talking to their parents. So unfortunately, I see that a lot where you don't have that conversation up front, and then parents don't know what to do, and kids don't want to talk to them. I'm blessed that, and this goes back to, my upbringing, but my kids, sometimes they share too much with my wife and I, and we don't want to know, but, I'd rather have it that way than having them shut down and then have to find out something later.
Yeah. It sounds like what's really important is to have that open communication and to maybe be having some foresight,
Absolutely.
maybe trying to address a problem before it's likely to become a problem. I'm curious, I want to ask you about helicopter parents. I think some parents need to practice resisting the urge to be overprotective. We hear a lot on the nightly news about how dangerous the world is and how scary things are. And when you see statistics about crime or kidnapping or all these terrible things, it kind of makes you go, should I even let my kid outside? Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of resisting that urge to be overbearing, or how do you find that right balance? Is there any one right answer for
it's
a
that
dad?
right balance, and it's like any other relationship. You have to build that relationship, communicate. I think sometimes parents think they don't have to do that with their kids. I'm the parent, I'm the dad, you're not. That's wrong. That's the wrong tack to take. I mean, there's a time and place to lay down the law and say you can't do this or do that, but having that open communication and then explaining, and then I know it's hard for some parents, and I hate the term, and I hate what I see when I see that helicopter parent thing where the mom is always around.
Yeah.
Kids can't grow. They can't learn from their mistakes. Yeah. It is an absolute fundamental of life that you need to fail, screw up, get better, learn from, move forward. Does it hurt? Absolutely. I can think of some times in my kids' lives where I was going, man, I wish they didn't have to go through that. And I wish I could step in and take it from them. Or I wish, or not saying, hey, will you go talk to so-and-so for me? No, absolutely not. That's your job. If you want to do that. I'll help you. I'll support you, but you got to learn to do that on your own. And, they're kids, and they're going to be better adults if they've been through that. So I think those parents that take that overprotective approach, that bubble approach, the helicopter approach where they're always there, are doing their kids an absolute disservice and a detriment. They're stifling their growth as a person. And they're unfortunately going to, I think, reap the negative consequences of that later, when then that child who never was allowed to fail or screw up or go anything on their own is then a 24, 25-year adult, and they get rejected on their first job, right? Or they get fired or they get yelled at by their boss, and then
they don't know what to do about it.
They go
It's
home.
so much more painful.
And I hate to say it, but I've in my career, I have seen parents, I'll specifically call out moms. There's been a couple moms who have stepped in a work environment to try to lobby for their kids, and it was like, you got to be kidding me. No, they're adults, let them do this on their own, and you have no say in that anymore. And I can see that, and I go, I know where this came from, because they did that, and they didn't raise their kids right when they do that. That's my personal opinion.
Well, and then we got to end up working with them.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people we worked with like that, and you're like, oh, great.
Yeah, no.
Man, I hope I don't do this to my kids.
No,
like,
you're having to help them grow up in their mid-20s,
Yeah. And it reminds me, too, just a little street smarts, too. That's kind of what, my parents taught me a little bit. And I don't know if that goes along with helicopter parents or bubbles. But
I'm going to go back with something you said. Man, times have changed. I mean, when I grew up, I rode my bike anywhere within about a 2 square mile radius. I took the city bus to go to school. I walked 3/4 mile. I mean, and there was, we played till dark. My dad would step on the front porch and whistle, and that's when we came home. Kids don't do that now because there are so many dangers lurking. So there is a element of you have to be more aware and more protective. It's just finding that balance. And I'll balance that out with, organized activities. There's a plethora of more organized activities for kids than we ever had when I was growing up. So you plug them into those things, and it kind of helps with that. But there's a point where you got to say, hey, be home by 6.
Yeah.
Let me know where you're going to be. This day and age when they're, I don't know what the youngest age anybody gives anybody a phone anymore. It used to be 12. It's probably younger, but put Life 360 on the phone. You make sure it's charged up. They can always contact you, and give them a little freedom to kind of explore a little bit.
So you've been in law enforcement for 45 years. I'm
You keep
curious.
saying that. You're really making me feel old.
For only 5 years.
What out of kindergarten into the police academy?
Looking back on all your experience, is it really true that there's more danger outside of your home, or are we just seeing more of it on the news, or is it maybe a little bit, is both true? I'm curious because what you're describing is a lot of what my childhood was hang out around this area in the neighborhood, and as long as you're home by dark, there's not a problem. We kind of had some boundaries and agreements in place with my mom and my dad, but my siblings don't do that. I'm the oldest. Okay. So it's like, is the world becoming a more dangerous place?
I think it's a combination. I think there were hidden dangers before that our parents weren't aware of, and if they were aware of them now, they go, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I let you do that.
Yeah,
I let you go there, unaware." So I think part of it's a good thing that we are more aware, and so take more precautions and protect our kids a little bit more. But I think there is that element. I think there is more danger out there that lurks in the shadows. That maybe there is more of that, but. Overall, I think it's just more of awareness. I think we were blessed. You were blessed. I was blessed that we didn't fall victim to something. But in my 45 years of police experience,
God, now you brought it up.
It's not all me now.
From my, I think that's always been there. It's just people didn't know about it. With with the advances in technology, we're more aware of what goes on in the world in general. I mean, there's certainly crime ebbs and flows and violent crime ebbs and flows. It was more violent in the 60s and the 70s when I was growing up than it is now. It really was. We just didn't see it all the time. You saw what was on the 6 o'clock news, that snippet, and that was it. But you're not getting bombarded with social media posts and 24/7 news cycles and everybody trying to get there quicker and lead with the nastiest and bloodiest and most tragic event of the day. Yeah. You're bombarded with that. So, in some ways, we were blessed that a lot of that was hidden, and we didn't see it because, for the most part, those things happen to a very, very, very small, minute segment of the population, and it doesn't affect everybody. But when you see it all the time, and it's in your face every day, then people tend to think, "Oh my gosh, this is happening next door. It could happen to me tomorrow. I'm gonna pull in and be a little more protective."
So let me make sure I have this right. It's maybe a combination of us being exposed to far more news than maybe we were a generation or two ago. That might be a symptom of why it is that we're feeling like children maybe have fewer freedoms than they did previously. But it's also true that maybe that helicoptering, it sounds like maybe we need to be asking ourselves as parents to say, how much of this is real imminent threat and how much of it is something that, it needs to be put into some context?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think we're exposed to more, but because we're exposed to more, we know more, we need to take more precautions. So
use that knowledge for good.
Yes, absolutely. Don't go overboard and go, "Oh my gosh, we need to lock them up until they're 20." All right. But also you can't do what I did, as a child in the 60s, which is get on my bike and ride 2.5 miles across town to, across 3 major thoroughfares in the city of Detroit to go play baseball for the day with a bunch of friends. Absolutely not. You just can't do that because we know those dangers are out there now where we didn't before.
I think it's easy to get discouraged and think that the world is just only a scary place. And so I went looking for some good news, and I have 2 things that I want to share. This is part of the research that I've done.
Good news for good dads.
Some good news for good dads. And this will hopefully be sparking some conversation. So one thing that I found is that when dads are positively engaged with their children from an early age, those children have fewer problems in middle childhood and adolescence. The second piece of good news that I found is that responsible and engaged fathers and their children are less likely to abuse drugs and in general are less likely to be involved in crime. So with those 2 pieces of information, I think it's important to kind of equip that as a dad and say, here's what the science says. So in your experience, Do these two things ring true?
Yes and yes. And I said earlier, it's personal experience. I'm sure we backed up by science. And those two things you just said are exactly what
I thought we
seeing.
weren't getting into science.
Oh, sorry.
What happened to when you were talking about anecdotal?
As soon as she said research, I
when
went,
we're not
okay,
doing it, I'm like, now we're doing it.
We've morphed into the
A little
science.
bit of both. Happy
I'm going to make
medium,
you cite your
maybe.
source, though, all right, if we're really going to get into it.
Where's your thesaurus in your glossary?
My glossary. My
But,
works cited.
So, all right, I hate to say it, but science shows that, the most formative years of a child's life are, 0 to 5, all right? So that imprinting on a child, and when a dad is engaged in a child's life at that point, we're not talking about laying boundaries. We're just talking about being present, and holding them and being there for them and doing everything. And then as they get into school, you mentioned middle school, absolutely. Then during grade school years, absolutely, it is essential to keep kids on the right path, making right decisions, seeing good examples, and keeping them away from those things that are going to hurt them. And dads need to be involved and engaged in that. And I just one personal experience. I was the only dad that this school had ever seen as a kindergarten homeroom dad. I was blessed. I was working evening shift. I was divorced at the time, so I had a lot of free time during the day. And my eldest was in kindergarten, and I went a couple days, and I saw they had a need. I volunteered, and what I saw during that experience, I could pick out the kids in that class who didn't have a father figure in their life.
Wow.
Two reasons: one, they gravitated to me.
They were
Absolutely.
looking for
They
someone
were
to
looking
be
for
that
something,
figure.
and I was able to kind of step in during that year and kind of do that.
Wow.
And then the ones that did, you could see that they were very comfortable in interacting with me and not standoffish, but didn't need to be hanging around me all the time. It was so anecdotal, not scientific, but I think it absolutely backs up what you said there.
Certainly. Well, why don't you bring us in for a landing? I want to talk a little bit about action steps. If you could maybe give one or two pieces of advice for a dad listening who wants his kid to maybe be aware of safety and how to have a safe neighborhood, but isn't really quite sure where to start. One thing I think about is how to be aware, but not always fearful. Do you have any ideas about that?
So depending on how old the child is, you need to have open, honest conversation, and it doesn't need to be a mandate. And you guys know as well as I do, kids will rebel if they're given a mandate and they're looking for a way around it. So
sure.
We talked about balance, all right, but the discussion needs to start with, I'm doing this because I'm trying to create a safe environment for you to grow up and experience things, and I'm gonna let you do things. And sometimes you're going to fail, and I want you to know I'm going to be there to support you. But I'm not going to wrap you up in a cocoon, all right? But if you step outside these boundaries, I am going to rein you back in, because that's my job.
Yeah.
That's my job as a dad, as a parent. And it's as they get older, you loosen. The other thing I'd say, you kind of loosen those reins a little bit. You may have a really tight leash, when they're young, all right? Like a horse or a dog. I mean, and then you give them their head a little bit, and you extend that leash. And not that I'm equating children to animals, but
It sounded a little bit.
I've learned with my dog, I've got one of those retractable leashes, which works a whole lot better than what I used to have when I grew up, just a 3-foot leash, and then you're always tugging, man, and you can let it out 6 feet and you can pull it in a foot, depending on, is there danger lurking? Do you see something you want to bring them back in? So I use that analogy with kids. That's what we need to do. Think of life as a retractable leash. And
that's a great analogy.
You're giving them some space. You're giving them some go, and you can still see them. All right. You're still somewhat connected. They don't even know you're connected. If you give them 10 feet, that leash is dragging on the ground, and they're free to do whatever they want. Yeah. But you see a danger, you see something they don't see, you see they're getting outside a little bit, you just hit the button and it brings them back. Not yanking, not pulling, not choking them, but brings them slowly back and lets them know, oh, yeah, Dad's still there, right? I'm good now. I think if dads specifically, parents in general, treated their kids like that, we'd have a whole lot more successful kids and parents.
Hopefully, I can borrow that leash for my kids.
Absolutely.
If you have it at home, if you can, they're probably going to need it, you know.
So let me. So a virtual leash for your children, right? Don't anybody think you need to go out and buy a leash. And I've seen those Silver Dollar City. You know, they got the harness on the kids, and you know that's fine. You know, keep them really safe. But yeah, don't go out and buy a bunch of leashes and strap on. And say the chief says.
No, no, yeah.
No, I'm talking about a virtual leash for your children.
I love it. Chief Paul Williams, thank you so much.
Absolutely,
we really
man.
appreciate it. Can we cue Inner Circle? What you gonna do?
No.
What you gonna do? Are we gonna play that? No, we're not gonna play that.
Bad boys, come on, man.
No. Okay.
I worked narcotics for 5 years. We played that on every raid.
Right, that's what I mean.
In.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. No bad boys. No,
no, we're not doing it. Okay. No,
okay.
Sorry.
All right. So we'll give away a pair of handcuffs. So just click below this link, and thank you so much. Not the Chiefs handcuffs. We've got
someone else's handcuffs
got some
that Jay acquired. Yeah.
That sounds really bad. Thank
I'm
you
not
so
touching
much.
that at all.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.